Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets. Whoa! Sports Talk 790. Rockets! Ready to go! Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another new episode of the Rockets Launch Pod presented by Clutch Fans. I'm Ben DuBose, he's Paulo Alves, and tonight we're going to be discussing the recent results for the Rockets, as well as the potential implications for the NBA's in-season trade deadline of this Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. So, a couple housekeeping items off the top. If this episode sounds a bit less polished than usual, we're doing only very minimal editing. We're recording this on Tuesday night, the 3rd of February, and the deadline is only about 40 hours away on Thursday afternoon. So the longer we take to get this out, the more time there is for something we say to get outdated. And even if it's not that, there's just less time for our audience to find and listen to the episode before the deadline if we wait. Also, I'm traveling this week, so I can't guarantee that my hotel Wi-Fi connection is as good as it usually is at home. I hope it is, but no promises. I will promise that we will have better production value in future episodes once I'm back in Houston and things are less time sensitive. And then one last disclaimer, Paulo and I are going to have a three-way post-game show with Dave Hardesty of Clutch Fans on Saturday afternoon once that nationally televised Rockets Thunder game is completed. We'll post that episode here on this podcast channel, but you can also listen live on the Clutch Fans YouTube page. And then on that show, beyond just reaction to that game, we'll also have reaction to the trade deadline, since it will have officially passed only about 48 hours before. So we're going to try and be a bit quicker today in this preview show, and then we can follow up with some more analysis after the fact to try and add more context as to what does or doesn't happen. All right, with disclaimers out of the way, let's get into today's show. The good news is what's happening on the basketball court. The Rockets, they've won their last 3 games over Atlanta, Dallas, and Indiana. That's improved them to 31-17 on the year, and they're actually 8-2 in their last 10 games. If you look at the top 8 seeds in the West as of Tuesday, that 8-2 mark from the Rockets is at least 2 games better than every other team in the top 8 over that span. So Houston's definitely making up some ground in the standings. They are still number 4 in the West, but they're now tied in the loss column with the Nuggets and only a game back of the Spurs. Houston has fewer games played than most teams, but that is going to change in the near future. The Rockets have a home back-to-back this week against the Celtics and Hornets on Wednesday and Thursday, and then they've got another one next week against the Clippers. So for better or for worse, the total of overall games, that's about to catch up. But as far as the key takeaways from their recent play, on the balance, you shouldn't ever complain about winning 80% of your games in a decent-sized sample. Keep in mind, the Rockets were just coming off a stretch where they went 10-10 in 20 games. So it's definitely improved. They're playing harder on defense, which you know Ime Udoka loves. They're executing better in close games. Jabari Smith Jr., he's bounced back after going through that deep slump in early January. There's lots of good signs. But with all that said, there is at least a small sense of unease with the fan base, and I understand why. It's not about the amount of games they've lost lately. I think it's about how they've lost. Because since the middle of January, you had 2 home games against the top 2 seeds in the West, the Thunder and the Spurs, and they both followed a very similar formula. Both were there for the taking entering the fourth quarter, and then you just couldn't generate any sort of half-court offense at all when it truly mattered. And then in between those games, you also lost at Philadelphia when you led by 8 with about 5 minutes left and 7 with about 3 minutes left, and it was a very similar story. Now, I'm not saying the Sixers are to the level of the Thunder or the Spurs, but when they have Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid both playing, both healthy, and especially at home, I do think they're a very good team. And so, for me, I wasn't I wouldn't call myself angry in the aftermath of those games because to me, they were understandable losses. It wasn't like when the Rockets choked away big leads this time a month or so ago to the Kings and the Pelicans, and it felt like you just weren't trying hard enough and you sort of disrespected the game. Those were games that I was livid after because the Rockets just let all of us down. And I think they would admit that they let themselves down. No, in these, they were trying and they just got out executed. It happens. But it was at the same time very sobering that on nights when you knew the Rockets were dialed in, they simply weren't good enough. That's at least how it felt to me. And I think that's especially the case because deep down, entering this season, at least after they lost Fred VanVleet to the torn ACL in September, we've all had a very similar fear, that underlying sense of dread. What's going to happen with the half-court offense when you really need to score against dialed-in opponents? And it dates back to last season because that's what held the Rockets back. They were very good to even great defensively, but they were mediocre on offense at best and worse than that in the half court. Now, in the offseason, you did add Kevin Durant, but then once you subtract the floor general and Fred, some of those fears are going to start to creep back in. You don't have a point guard, a floor general to get you organized. And then you look at the coaching. Ime Udoka, it's proven he's an elite defensive coach. I think that's safe to say, but offensively, at least to this point, it's a little more of a mixed bag. And then last week, we also got the bad news that Steven Adams, he's out for the year with his severely sprained ankle, which did end up requiring surgery. We talked a lot on this show about how important Steven is as a floor raiser on defense, but he also helps really steady your offense with how elite he is at offensive rebounds and giving you second, third, even fourth opportunities. So relative to the formula that we thought this team had when this roster was put together last offseason, when you brought back most of the rotation, aside from Dillon Brooks and Jalen Green, well, now if you take out both Fred and Steven, and DFS is still a partial participant, it's a pretty big hit to the formula. And then if you end up losing to the two top teams in the West in much the same way by not generating enough offense, it's unsettling. I get it. And so you flash forward to this week when we're a couple of days from the trade deadline, and in theory, it's exciting. In theory, it's a chance to address any deficiencies that your roster may have. But then you also have to balance that. If you're Rafael Stone, you have to consider not just this season, but next season and future years and the blueprint for what they hope is a sustainable contender led by the likes of Amin Thompson, Alperen Sengun, and Reed Shepherd. So there's a lot that goes into it, and we'll try and unpack it not just on today's show, but our deadline recap later in the week as well. Anyway, Paulo, I'll bring you in here. The results have definitely improved the past couple of weeks. Nobody can deny that. But there's also that sense of unease with the way they've lost some of those bigger games. And now knowing that neither Fred nor Steven is coming back to rescue you. Well, I guess Fred still theoretically could, but I think you take that as a bonus if he somehow does. You certainly don't set it as the expectation. Just overall, Paulo, how are you feeling about this specific team and its ultimate potential, given the results of the last couple of weeks and as we head into the final hours before the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think it's tough, and I think it kind of ties into each other, which is, well, how much of a contender can you truly be when you have what's effectively now, assuming Fred doesn't come back, 40 million worth of dead cap, right? Guys that are not going to come back. And to be fair, this team was built with a lot of depth and with the perspective that, well, perhaps not these guys. These guys were not the ones that were expected to be injured. Like you probably they built a lot of depth on the wings because KV's 37 and he has been kind of injury prone in the last few years. Tari's obviously coming off of 2 rough years due to injury, and they had a lot of I guess a bigger kind of security blanket when it comes to those positions. But still, even as a deep team, right? The guys that they did lose are guys that bring stuff that nobody else could bring. Like if you lost Tari Eason, would have been rough, but Dorian Finney-Smith, assuming he plays a little bit better, he hasn't shown it yet. But in theory, you could, you could get 80% of Tari Eason with Dorian Finney-Smith. Steven Adams to a lesser extent than Fred, But Capella doesn't give you 80% Steven Adams. He gives you like 50, on a good night. Like Quint, just different type of player. The offensive rebounding still that he still gives you some of that. Obviously not to the same extent. But the connective passing that Steven Adams did, the insane screen setting that Steven Adams gave you, the seemingly great toucher on the rim that Steven Adams seems to have now, the free throw percentage. Clint's at a point that, like, wholly unconfident that he can make any shot that's not a dunk at this point. Like, he tries floaters sometimes, he tries some hook shots, layups or stuff, but like that's not much there offensively. And so he's very, very much of a lesser version of Adams, but way more than if we lost one of our wings. And Fred's, what we know Fred is, we don't have a replacement for him. Rich Shepard can bring it to some extent, but he's a rookie. He's inconsistent. Not a rookie. He's a second-year player. He's inconsistent, still a young player. And so it just seems like losing 40 mil worth of your cap space for this year, worth of players, at very key, kind of irreplaceable positions, kind of puts a little bit of a ceiling on what your team can be, especially so when it's not like this is, the NFL of this year, where you don't have Mahomes or you don't have any super teams and everybody's kind of on an equal footing heading into the postseason. The Thunder are still there. The Thunder are, they're not fully healthy because Jalen Williams is out, but they're gonna be fully healthy once the postseason comes along. The Spurs, will see how this deadline shapes them up, but they seem to be, on an upwards trajectory. But I do think the Spurs and the Nuggets are kind of on the same level as the Rockets, even without Fred and Steven Adams. I think we can put up a fight. But how competitive do we expect to be over a 7-game playoff series when we're playing the Thunder without those two guys? And that frames what we've seen thus far. And it frames kind of my thoughts going through the deadline, which is, well, I guess I'm okay if you want to, spend a couple of second-round picks and trade a guy like Clint Capella or Dorian Finney-Smith for a guard, like plenty of people on Twitter want to do. So, if the investment is 2 second-round picks and the potential and the loss of an asset, the loss of what could be an asset, Dorian Finney-Smith, and someone who I don't think is an asset, just neutral value contract in Capella, I'm willing to give that up to give this team a better shot. But I don't think that's going to push us over the line and turn us into tier 1 contenders or a team that you could realistically think is going to beat the Thunder in the 7-game series now while that things have happened. But you don't bank real assets on a while that things have happened shot at winning a championship. So yeah, looking at the past few games, it just seems like this team, like they're winning now. That's cool. I think they're winning more than what they should be winning, just like they were losing more than what they should be losing a couple, like 10 games back when everybody was in crisis mode. Well, we lost some games that we could have won, a couple of bounces go a different way, and we win. I think this time the opposite is happening as well for this, stretch of 10 games where we won 8, lost 2. So, all in all, just to say that those variations come and go, it just seems like the eye test doesn't lie. And you look at this team and you watch this team play, and it feels like they can play up or down to the competition level of basically any team. Like, they don't beat teams convincingly. Like, you're playing the Pacers without Tyrese Haliburton, like clear tanking team, and they hung on for a very long time. Granted, you didn't have KD, but you did have an amazing game from Alperen Sengun. That game should not have been particularly close. It's not like it's a one-game thing. It's been a trend throughout the entire season. This team just plays down the competition, and then they don't strike me as a truly elite team. Earlier on in the season, you could have made the case because the offense was just insanely hot, and we could close our eyes to what the defense had been. The defense has gotten better. The offense has gotten dramatically worse. And so, those things even out. But it just doesn't strike me as a team that you should invest real assets, this being first-round picks or trading away young players, into come this deadline, unless you're trading for a guy that you think is a piece that fits here long-term, right? If you want to make the case to me that Kobe White's someone who we should re-sign, though you'd rather have him than Fred VanVleet next year, something of the sort, I understand it better than some other alternative that costs a first round pick. I don't think Kobe White's going to fetch a first round pick, but just because the Bulls have kind of cornered themselves into a situation where they have 5 point guards at this point in time. We're mid trade bust to recording this. They have 5 point guards. Someone's going to get bought out, and they don't really have the leverage to extract maximum value. And if you ask me, between giving up Capella in a couple of seconds for Kobe White and just waiting to see which one of these guys they cut, because they're going to cut a couple of them, might be Anthony Simons. The Rockets do have, if the Rockets are looking for a point guard in the buyout market, which there seems to, there's going to be some there, the Rockets are a prime destination. Team that clearly needs a point guard that's, probably as much of a contender as any of these guys is going to get in a buyout, with as big of a role as any of these guys are going to get on a team that actually matters. So the Rockets are in prime position to grab whoever the best buyout point guard is, and it seems like it's shaping up that some decent guy is going to be there. So why would you really give up, assets for it, especially premium assets, but even assets at all? Maybe you'd rather keep that powder dry to make a better move next year's deadline. Not giving up on this team at all, right? Do think that we have to be realistic, and the ceiling isn't high enough to warrant something like that. Unless, as I said, you're making a move for a guy that you think is going to be here long term. And to put a bow on it before I pass it off back to you, I think 2 second-round picks is not a lot, but the Rockets do not have a lot of second-round picks. So it's like, okay, it's not a lot of assets, but it's an asset the Rockets don't have a surplus of. And so that's not prohibitive, but it's uncomfortable. The same way that trading Capella and not bringing back another big is not prohibitive. You could do it. You could play more Jabari Smith at the 5. You could try some new stuff. But he is currently your backup center, like your bench center. So if you trade him, you're going to have to go search for someone else. So once again, not prohibitive, but also kind of uncomfortable. Like, who are you going to get afterwards? You're just kind of shifting, you get a point guard, but then you're gonna have to go find the backup center. And then without Finney-Smith, once again, not prohibitive of trading him, but there are a couple of uncomfortable factors with trading him. But first of all, the fact that he has a 3-year deal and he's not playing up to the money here he's making. Not terribly toxic contract, but could easily get out of it if the Rockets wanted to. It's a 4-year deal, but it has an opt-out after years 2. But it's uncomfortable because of that. Like, our team's going to look at it as a neutral salary. Are they going to demand an extra second-round pick or 2 to take him on because of the extra year of salary versus an expiring guy? And then it's also a bit uncomfortable because, he's playing so poorly and he's coming off a pretty massive injury that took him out for a pretty long amount of time. How much of this is still rust? Like we saw, we've seen guys come off of injury and take some time to get chugging along, so to speak. And so, yes, if you're giving up Dorian Finney-Smith, but if you look at what Dorian Finney-Smith has been the last couple of years, while playing through the injury that sidelined him, that's a very useful player. That's a player that's worth assets, and that's a player that's under very good contract value-wise if he comes at anywhere close to what that player was back then. Right? So it's not prohibitive. It's not a terrible bet to make that he's not going to get back to that level. But it's also uncomfortable because he might look like an idiot for trading him after getting him on that contract. And, turns out you might need someone like him next season as well. Once again, he was supposed to be kind of the Dylan Brooks replacement on defense. Has not materialized. Once again, all of these small moves have uncomfortable sides to them. I'm saying not prohibitive, not the types of things that I would be like, oh my God, we're such idiots that we made a move like this. Don't feel like that. Feel like there's reasonable argument to make a move like that. Just I'm not up in arms if nothing gets done, because if I were in Stone's place, depending on what's reaching my desk, I might do the same thing. Because, at the very least, it's also uncomfortable to trade for a guy that's going to take minutes away from Reed Shepherd if he's not going to move the needle, because you might as well give Reed those reps and have him be a stronger player going into next season. If, the difference is going to be winning an extra game in a playoff series that doesn't get you across the line when you're sort of doomed to lose to the Thunder anyways, because you're just not that caliber of team. When you don't have the massive offensive rebounding edge that Steven Adams gives you, and you don't have the massive turnover differential edge that Fred VanVleet gives you as well, and you are that volatile shooting-wise, which is what the Rockets are right now, and you have a star in Şengün that just had a really great game, but once at the same time is kind of slumping. So, with all of those things, if you have all of those ifs, it might be better to stay the Bucks. That's how I'm feeling at this moment.
Yeah, and on the turnover differential point, we should note that Amen Thompson has gotten much better in recent games at limiting those, but it's not the same as having both Amen and Fred. And also the schedule has been relatively weak of late with, a couple of exceptions against the Thunder and the Spurs. It's about to get much more difficult for the Rockets moving forward, leading into and out of the All-Star break. So we'll see how that trend of reduced turnovers holds. As far as the trade deadline implications, Paulo, just a simple yes or no question for you. If you stay the course, is your window more open next year than it is this year? Keep in mind that next year, you might have some slippage from Kevin Durant. He'll turn 38 years old. Father time stops for no one. Yet, Amen Thompson, Reed Sheppard should both get a decent bit better, perhaps a lot better in Reed's case. And you're going to be getting 2.5 rotation players, starting level players that you don't have right now. I say 2.5 because Fred, Steven, and you basically have half of DFS right now. So the KD, Amen, and Reed component, perhaps the latter two ascending, the former on the decline, and then adding the 2.5 guys that are injured right now. My contention is that your championship window, and that's before we factor in any other moves they might make. They have this stockpile of future picks. They can potentially sign people in free agency. My contention is that knowing what we know right now, the window is more likely to be open next season than this season. Would you agree with that?
Well, as a yes or no question, yes, I would agree with it, just because with these all-time greats, right, they're going to be greats until they aren't, and then a lot of the time you don't have kind of a clue of them slowing down. But I just think that KD is going to be just as good as he is this year, next year. So I don't think there's going to be any regression there. And, even they'll be in a much better position just because a lot of what I call minor, uncomfortableness moving certain guys, by next year, it will all be solved. By next year, if Dorian Finney-Smith is still playing to this level, we'll know. It'll be an expiring salary, but we'll know, okay, this is a guy we can move. This is $12 million we can move easily. Steven Adams, we'll see when he comes back. That might be still a question mark. Hopefully, he's back by the beginning of the next season. But Fred VanVleet, right, at this point next year, I don't think he has the no-trade clause anymore. I think that's a result of the player option, or I think that's a result of it being a one-year deal. I don't quite remember anymore, but I don't think he's going to have a no-trade clause or a trade veto next year. So you do have more flexibility with that. Going into next season, Clint Capella, if Steven Adams is back, and if you sign a minimum center in free agency instead of having, the Jeff Green, Jason Tate types off the bench, you might be able to more easily package Clint Capella on a bigger salary to make a move to get better at that point. To be in a better position to make a move to get better. And to answer your question straight on, I do think that Amen and Reed for sure will take steps forward, and I don't see a reason to believe any of the other guys are going to get worse. So yes, I do think that barring something wild happening, they'll be in a better position next year than they are this year. Oh, and before I bring it back to you real quick, I do want to underline and reinforce your point on Amen Thompson and the turnovers. He's been taking care of the ball for the better part of a month now. I know he just had a 5 turnover game, but he's from a playmaking efficiency standpoint, he's been great. So I don't think that's an argument at all. But still, better with Fred. He's been efficient with his playmaking, right? But he is still not at that level of creating advantages, like with his mind, and ball handling in the pick and roll, and the threat of pulling up from three and all the space that generates on your lead ball handler, right? So even though he's been efficient with the opportunities that he does create, it's not like he's creating the volume of opportunities that Fred would and the volume of advantages that Fred would on the ball if he's still the same player he was.
Okay, so the reason I asked you the question about this season versus next season, so much of the discourse, at least on my timelines, it just overly simplifies it into, two camps. Either you want them to do something aggressively now, or you're fine just waiting indefinitely and punting. And that's not the case. The absolute worst case, we're talking about next season, the one that begins in October, 7 or 8 months from now. So we're not talking about waiting until some indefinite period in the future and saying, well, we're going to sacrifice a potential run this season for the sake of some time in the future that may not come, and all these hypotheticals. No, all we're saying is the season that starts in a few months, when you get these guys back healthy, you're in a better position for your younger players to develop, to make major moves if you need it in the offseason. We're not talking waiting an indefinite period. We're talking about the season that is literally just a few months away. So let's drop the straw man framing of either you go all in now or you're punting on the Kevin Durant era and waiting an indefinite period until the window opens again. It's not that simple. So that's not to say that they can't win a championship this year. KD can go on his 2011 Dirk run. I've mentioned that comparison before. Maybe you also get lucky with injuries. Last year, the Timberwolves got to the Western Conference Finals because Steph Curry pulled his hamstring in game 1 of that second round series and he couldn't play the rest of the way. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure Golden State wins that series. Maybe the same thing happens with the Thunder and SGA this year. Not saying I'm pulling for it, but this stuff does happen in a contact sport. So you're certainly not saying they can't win a championship this year. If you have KD, you have a chance. So I don't agree that punting means they have no chance to begin with. And I also don't agree that, well, you're just waiting for some, mythical time in the future that nobody can point to. No, we know the time. It's next year. It's saying that is a better chance. And so you draw the line between aggressive and reckless. You can still look aggressively to upgrade this year's team if opportunities present themselves, but you shouldn't be reckless, which is to decrease your odds in a year when they should be pretty good, to slightly increase your odds in a year that they're not good to begin with. And that's the needle that I believe Rafelstone is trying to thread. And in the case of, Kobe White, because that gets thrown out a lot, if you give up Dorian Finney-Smith or Steven Adams at a future first-round pick, I've seen this hypothetical thrown out so many places, you're giving up a future first from your stockpile that could be part of an asset for a bigger move down the line. And you're giving up a quality rotation player, one that I think the Rockets, I honestly think that if you ask for Felstone, now there's some risk with health, sure, but if they're healthy and they've got a medical staff that they can lean on, I think they truly believe that Steven Adams and Dorian Finney-Smith will be more impactful players when it comes to winning than Kobe White will next season. So you'd be giving up potentially the better player and a first-round pick and the friendlier contract. If you do retain Kobe White, I have a feeling it'd be much more than the $12 million or so in annual value on short-term deals that DFS and Steven are on. So for a team that's going to get way more expensive, you're going to have a max or very close to max deal for Amen Thompson. You'd be getting a more expensive contract, potentially a lesser player, and losing a first-round pick, all for whatever bump Kobe White would give this year's team. And personally, I don't see Kobe White as a long-term fit. Now, I don't want to focus too much on him because I think the same logic can be used for a lot of guys. But in the case of Kobe White, look, you'd have 3 small guards. It's tough to play, in my opinion, all 3 of Fred VanVleet, Kobe White, and Reed Sheppard. And I think the Rockets believe that, well, Fred will be a better player next season. People say, well, what will he come back as? Even if he's 80% of what he was last season, I think he'd still be clearly a better player than Kobe White. The Rockets firmly believe that last year's team, the number 2 seed in the West, Fred VanVleet was their most valuable player. The Rockets firmly believed this. So even if he's 75, 80%, one of these more dire scenarios, and at this point, he will have had more than a full calendar year to rehab the ACL in this scenario where we're talking about next year, and basically a year and a half by the time of the 27 playoffs, which is what really matters. yes, I think he's better than Kobe White, and I think Reed Sheppard is more of a developmental priority. I think giving up potentially a better player, a better contract, and a first-round pick, all for whatever bump that Kobe White would give this year's team. And by the way, he probably decreased Reed Sheppard's minutes for this year's team, and Reed's been a huge upside variable. Hopefully he can get hot again, because certainly, a big part of their decline since December 1st, they've started to find it, at least in terms of win-loss record in recent games, so they haven't consistently been as dominant as they were the first 6 weeks of the year. Well, that was when you had Reed Sheppard in peak form, and if you bring in a Kobe White, you're going to be limiting the opportunities inherently for Reed Sheppard. There's only so many small guards that you can play. So you're giving up a lot, and in my opinion, it doesn't really move the needle. Now, if it's the type of player who does move the needle to where the Rockets look like more of a contender this year, or maybe it's a Kobe White move in tandem with something else, then okay, that's a different conversation. But I guess the way I'm looking at it, is the juice worth the squeeze? And if you're giving up more from next year's team when the window should be more open, it better move the needle for this year's team. And I just don't think so many of the suggestions do. And, one on the higher end, I saw some suggestions today that, the Rockets, if they could get Fred to sign off on a deal, could use Fred and Reed to go after James Harden, who it appears is on his way out of LA. You mean to tell me you're okay with giving up a 21-year-old Reed Sheppard, a guy who the Rockets believe could be one of the best offensive players in the NBA one day, for a 36 or 37-year-old James Harden, a guy you could have had for just nothing but cap space? He was begging to come here just a couple of years ago. Now you're willing to give up a number 3 overall pick at 21 years old, who the team thinks, and we've seen glimpses of it, could be one of the best offensive players in the league one day? That's just ridiculously reckless. At least with James, there's a little bit more of a case to be made that you add him to this year's team, and maybe they could make a run. But then there's even a greater hit to not just next year, but the years beyond that. I mean, that trade would age horribly when you look a couple of years from now, unless you win a championship, unless you literally win a championship. Giving up Reed Sheppard at this stage for James Harden would look awful, and it would look even worse when we all know James was begging to come back here a couple of years ago, and it would have cost you nothing but cap space. Like, people are just so desperate for the adrenaline hit of seeing that Shams tweet that the Rockets made an impact move, that I think people are missing the forest for the trees. And what bothers me so much about it, the counter argument to all of this is Kevin Durant's 37 years old. How much longer can you count on this version of Kevin Durant? What frustrates me so much, Paulo, if that was the mindset, if it was just about getting one of the all-time greats, which he is, and maximizing your chances with Kevin in a Rockets jersey. In other words, if it was about Kevin Durant and not about the young core, the Rockets should have traded for Kevin Durant this exact time a year ago. He was on the market at the deadline. There were already a few reports that he was open to Houston. We knew Houston needed a top scorer. Obviously, his college ties to Texas. If it was just about Kevin Durant, you could have added Kevin Durant to last year's team that was already the 2 seed in the West. I think you almost certainly would have beaten the Warriors. So if your whole mindset is just maximize your chances when you have Kevin Durant because he's Kevin Durant and worry about everything else later, then why weren't you pushing for the Rockets to do whatever it takes to acquire KD this time a year ago? Because I don't remember that. I feel like most people were against KD because of his age and said, you know what, if you can get him cheap, that's fine. We can wait until the summer. If not, that's fine too. Well, somehow I think seeing KD in a Rockets jersey, it's sort of been, a mind fuck. Excuse my language on that, but it's just warped people's minds to where now they can't see the forest for the trees. Like, they're so in love. And I get it. Like, KD's amazing to watch. But all of a sudden, the perspective has changed to where it feels like the consensus is the Rockets have to do something, or they're missing this golden window. They're doing wrong by KD. And the reality is the timeline was and is about the young core. They waited until the price came down on Kevin Durant to where he could be an add-on to the young core of Amen, Şengün, Reed Sheppard, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason. He could bolster their development. You can win a few more games in the interim. Maybe you contend for or win a title. But it was never about just trade for Kevin Durant and immediately open the window, like, say, the Lakers acquiring LeBron James whenever he joined them in 2018 or 2019. The Rockets were never about Kevin Durant to the extent that the Lakers were about LeBron James the last few years, or at least until the Luka trade. And yet that's the way I feel like the fan base has transitioned. Just watching KD for half a year, and to his credit, he's been amazing. But it feels like everybody has just moved the goalpost to where now nobody even cares about the young core that much. And it's just maximize KD, and whatever consequences there are to the future, whatever. We have KD. We'll worry about those another day. And I just think that's overly emotional and reactionary thinking. It's not compatible with the way fans viewed it a year ago. It's not compatible with how the Rockets viewed the situation themselves when they chose not to trade for him this time a year ago and, punted on the opportunity to add KD to last season's team for the playoffs, or waiting it out until the price dropped. I guess the bottom line for me is that to build what the Rockets want, which is a sustainable contender, it takes a lot of vision, it takes hard choices, and so many of the decisions that are being advocated for are just reckless, and they're moving the goalposts. Like, to go from passing on James Harden when all it would have cost you is cap space, to wanting to sacrifice Reed Shepherd for him, to giving up important pieces for next season's team and future first-round picks for a moderate upgrade to this season's team, to wanting everything to be about Kevin Durant and not about the young core and the blueprint of what they're trying to build for the next 10 to 12 years. It's just very short-sighted. I get it. KD is amazing to watch, and I would love nothing more than the Rockets to win a championship this year. But I do think they have to be responsible. There are very fine lines here, and I guess what I would say in closing this rant, I'm not asking fans to wait indefinitely. All I'm saying is, unless it's a clear needle-moving deal this year, which I don't think Kobe White is, think long and hard before you sacrifice a year that's already, or sacrifice a lot from a year that's already better on paper, especially when we're talking just a few months later. That's all we're talking about. So, Paulo, I'm curious, you spend more time on Twitter than I do these days. Have you seen the same trend, and what do you make of it? This sort of pivot that now it feels like for the fan base, so much of it is about Kevin Durant as opposed to being about the young core.
Yeah, so I think there's I do not spend as much time on Twitter as I used to, but I do think that there's a few things that come together. I'm gonna kind of touch on a lot of points that you made. I do think that same people who are saying we should make a move now, or a short-sighted move now, or whatever you want to call it, they would have done the same last deadline. I think they are the same types of people who would have said, "Oh, we should have traded for KD last time." Like, I do think that a lot of it comes from the perspective of, these people want a bit of the dopamine hit. These people, want to go all in every year. Because as long as I've followed the Rockets, every deadline, and perhaps it's a little bit of leftover from the Maury era, where people expected to move every single time. People, even when we were bad, people wanted to short-sighted moves to be made to make the team better, right? So I do think that the people that are saying this now would have said the same last year. So your point on they should have traded for KD back then. Well, yes, you are right, but I don't think that that moves them or that changes anything for the people who are defending a win now move now. Then I think the talking point in the conversation shifts a bit, because there's a huge influx of KD only fans, and KD only fans don't give a flying, what about what the Rockets' future prospects are. They want KD's window maximized now. So I think there's the influx of people like that kind of shifts the discourse in that direction as well. And then, I mean, you said they should have, if they wanted to win now with KD, they should have traded for him half a season before. I mean, I'll make an easier point than that. If the goal is to win with KD right now, they should be trading for Giannis. It's as simple as that.
That would move the needle.
Yeah, if they want to move the needle now, that's what they should be doing. So they want to, go all out with KD. That's what they should be doing. So, regarding all of the KD part of it, that's mostly what I have on it. But I do want to touch on a couple of things I said before as well. I do not think the Kobe White price is going to end up as expensive as you're saying. I think
I agree. You could get lower, and you could talk me into, your suggestion of DFS and a couple of first-round picks. I mean, if you're sacrificing just one asset, i.e. DFS, but you're keeping the first, I'm more open to that. My mindset had been, I'm not willing to sell so low on any of the injured guys that you're having to, expend future first-round draft capital to move them at this time. But if it's that low, maybe. But some of the proposals, I mean, people are throwing around first round picks like they're candy, Paolo. I know you've seen it too.
Yep. No, yeah, no, 100%. But I do think, and I'll shout out Will because we had this conversation before. I do think that, especially the way the market has trended now, that Kobe White might be available for some combination of second round picks. And a combination of second round picks and Dorian Finney-Smith, which is selling low on him, is an investment. It's a small investment. And it's kind of, it's kind of like if you were throwing just, a small part of like your portfolio on a startup, right? Where you're like, okay, maybe this catches fire if I make this small investment. I'm okay losing this money, so let's put it there. Like that's the way I would see a Kobe White trade in those terms, right? Which is why I'm fine with it, even though I typically would not stand behind a move like that. I would probably rather stay the course because I'm more boom or bust. I'm more in the sense of, if this team's gonna make a serious leap or a serious threat to the Thunder, it likely comes through outlierish man development, Rich Shepard development, injuries, stuff like that. I'd rather have that as a ceiling, and the 4B, these guys are getting this experience, even though these guys are not that, they're not first year players anymore. Well, Reed's a second year player, but and the variation is a bit smaller. But I'd be fine making a move like that. It's not like I'd be killing them if they made a move like that. If they trade the first for Kobe White, I'll be killing them on here next week. The two scenarios is you either go all out and you make a big move, or you don't make a move at all, or you make a very small move around the margins, or you hope, which I do think's gonna happen, and I don't think people have settled in to the trades that just happened, and some more might happen, but the Bulls currently have like 5 point guards and Josh Giddey. So it's not like they're gonna buy out one of them. They're gonna buy out probably 2 or 3, and they have no interest. They have no interest in resigning Kobe White. That has been well established. They have Ayo Dosunmu, which makes sense for their team right now. They still have, I think it's Trey Jones. They have Giddey. They just traded for Jaden Ivey. Top 3 guys on Mike Conley as well. But I'm just that's a given that he's gonna get bought up before Kobe White or even Anthony Simons come into play. Giddey, Dosunmu, what's the other one? Ivy are clearly above in the depth chart, and then Trey Mann might be above those other 2 as well. Not Trey Mann, sorry, Trey Jones. So beyond then, like, they have no interest in bringing back Anthony Simons next season. They have plenty of guards, and he's a small guard. He's never gonna fit there. So it's not like they would keep him rotting and on the end of the bench just for bird rights reasons. So if there's a real scenario when he gets bought out, Kobe White they'll likely just take whatever the best offer they can get for him. He's easy enough to match salary-wise, and some team will give up real assets, at least second-round picks for him. So he's not going to get bought out, he's going to get traded. But Anthony Simons and Mike Conley, I think there's a real chance Anthony Simons gets bought out. And as I said, if one of these guards gets bought out, the Rockets are top of the line as to what these guys would be looking for in a team to sign up for. The Rockets are a top half playoff team at the very least this season in the West. They have the reps to give a guy like that, and the potential for him to become a key piece if Rich Shepard falls apart for some reason, or if the Rockets need the shooting or whatever it may be. So considering that the Rockets are a prime candidate if one of those guys becomes available, and how likely it is given how things are shaken up for those guys to be available, it makes even more sense to wait for the buyout market rather than spend a couple of seconds. Because how big is the gap really from Kobe White to Anthony Simons, right? Anthony Simons is the worst player, I would say. Better shooter, better ball handler, and true point guard. Kobe White's taller, shorter arm, like he's 6'5" with 6'5" wingspan. has so T-Rex arms. Is it really worth giving up this matching salary and a couple of seconds, even if that's the price, rather than getting this cheaper guy, since they're not gonna, either of them are not gonna move the needle that much. So as things currently stand, not gonna be mad if they make a crappy, small asset trade for a guy like Kobe White. Not gonna be outraged. But not gonna be outraged either if they don't and wait for the buyout market.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what moves would make sense to make. It's either a massive move that truly shifts the needle, or at least two moderate moves, which I guess combined could theoretically have that level of impact, or something minor or nothing at all. And nothing at all probably doesn't literally mean nothing. It could mean waiting until the buyout market. But I think if you had to rank it, I'd say major, minor to nothing, and then moderate. But what I think has happened is, people know this team is close. They love Kevin Durant, and they want this to be the year. And I do too. It's been over 30 years now since the Rockets won the NBA title. I get it. They haven't even done it in your lifetime, Paolo. So I completely understand. But I just think there's a psychology, because everybody knows how difficult it is to put a mega deal together. And there's also the issue of how much salary you have to send out. The Rockets are hard capped at the first apron. That people sort of talk themselves into the moderate scenarios because they feel more realistic. Even if it doesn't necessarily move the needle, it would make you a better team than you are right now and address one of these glaring deficiencies. And so it feels good. But in terms of what actually makes sense for this season and beyond, I just don't see that moderate move unless it's in tandem with two or three other things being worthwhile. I think it's a big move, which I haven't heard anything of at all, or something really small. And by the way, I mentioned this earlier, but I don't think the Rockets view Kobe White as a fit personally, beyond just the long term. I just don't think they see the basketball fit as ideal, or at least what it would be worth in terms of, not just the assets you'd give up, even if they're seconds, but even, Dorian Finney-Smith or Steven Adams, someone like that they really like on the contracts that they're on for not just this season, but future years as well, because there is a pretty tricky financial picture for this team as they try and navigate the next few years with these young guys getting onto their second contracts. So I tend to think that it'll be a smaller deal, largely for matching salary reasons. I just don't think they want to, sell low on guys they truly believe in for next season. I think it's even harder to move Clint Capella now that you don't have Steven Adams. And so if you use Clint Capella as matching salary, unless it's in a move for a big, well, then you create another hole. Even if it's a small hole, it's another hole nonetheless. And when you're talking about trying to win a title this year, any deficiency potentially matters. So it's tough to see where the matching salary comes from. I could maybe see trades, $5 million or less, where you could cobble together a couple of minimums and, send them elsewhere and maybe take in a $5 million a year type player into the Fred VanVleet exception. The Sixers, for example, they're trying to deduct the luxury tax. By the way, Paolo, I don't think anybody respects that Sixers win over the Rockets anymore, because they were using a cheating Paul George. So let's turn that into a win. The Rockets are really 32-16 because nobody respects or counts that Sixers win when they were playing a cheating Paul George. At least that's the way I've been assured it works with the Astros. But no, because of that suspension, the Sixers are close enough to the luxury tax that they could duck below it by trading like an Andre Drummond or an Eric Gordon, someone like that. And so I could see the Rockets maybe taking on someone like that, moving out a couple of minimums if they have to do a dance with 10-day contract guys. But there are ways you could stay beneath the first apron. I was thinking Jose Alvarado, who I know they like, and he's an Ime Udoka culture guy defensively. But I mean, you sort of took me out of it, Paolo. You're probably going to be more likely to get better point guards, players at that same position on the buyout market. So I'm not sure if it'd be worth even giving up a couple of second round picks, which the Pelicans would surely want for a player who's, pretty useful and just in his 20s. So as far as deals that aren't buyouts, something $5 million or less, Drummond, Eric Gordon, Jose Alvarado, maybe I could see those being fits. I think the Rockets like Drummond as a player, and he provides more insurance up front after losing Steven Adams. Eric Gordon's a little old, but you can trust him in the playoffs. He obviously has a ton of familiarity with the Rockets, this front office, ownership.
No, I refuse.
I know that would be sensitive to you, But like I could see smaller things like that, but more realistically, I think we're trending towards the buyout market. And as far as who those buyouts are, we can talk about that at the end of the week once we get past the trade deadline and we see who's traded, who isn't, and who's on the buyout market. Is there anyone else that I missed in, like, let's say like $5 million or less, i.e. you're just using some combination of the minimums and maybe you're helping some other team, dump salaries to avoid the tax and so you don't have to give up even second round picks from your end? Is there anybody else I didn't mention that might be a trade target as opposed to buyout?
I don't have anybody. I just wanted to come in now that you talked about Eric Gordon and say, who cares what Ben DuBose thinks about acquiring Eric Gordon at a time like this? And this is to be PG and not say who gives it.
Okay, we're done. All right, with that, we will adjourn for tonight. There's definitely more we could unpack, but as we mentioned off the top, we are trying to be a bit quicker tonight because we will be back before the week is through. We're going to have that post-game show with Dave Hardesty after the Rockets-Thunder game on Saturday afternoon, and so at that point, we'll try and weave more analysis into what happened or didn't happen at the trade deadline. We'll recap not just the Thunder game, but the trade deadline as well. We'll talk about certainly whatever happens, but also offer some explanation and context as to why that was the case. Until then, this is where we break. And if you want more content from us, best place to hear more is on social media. I'm at Ben DuBose, Paulo's at Paulo Alves NBA. And this show is available on Twitter/X at LaunchPod790. And if you hit up the link tree in the bio, that's got links to all our friends, partners, and sponsors, as well as distribution platforms. Basically anything you could need to help support the show or consume additional content from us. If you haven't already subscribed and left a positive review at your podcast channel of choice, please do. That's how we can keep looking good to those friends, partners, and sponsors, and keep this show going as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. All right, with the plugs complete, I think we're officially done. For Paulo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always to each of you for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of the Rockets Launch Pod.